I'm actually not a local Mackay district resident. I'm from Bundaberg, but over the last 2 years I've had the privilege of working in this district on and off, primarily with cane growers, with John Eden. But in that time I've managed to cross paths with Daniel and other local agronomy people, as well as a lot of landholders. So I've had a good time working up here. So a lot of what you've heard today, I'm almost going to probably say in a different way some of those key points. So the key messages today have actually been very consistent, and I suspect I'll probably continue on that path. But I'm going to quickly start, or briefly start, with the value of knowing your soil, and I suspect everyone knows that. And then I'm going to move to the soils of the Mackay district. Then I'm going to move towards accessing that data, and then other things you can do to build and develop your soil knowledge, and some of those attributes that as landholders, land managers, that you can look at and see in the field, how you can do that yourself to better understand your soils and then better utilise that information to build your own knowledge. Because at the end of the day, that's, I think, the single message I'm hearing today. It's about building knowledge. So I found this quote, without knowledge, action is useless, and knowledge without action is futile. I don't know why I put that in, but I just thought, since the topic of my presentation is about building knowledge, I thought it was actually a really interesting quote, probably relevant to many of us in all parts of our lives. So I won't say anything more about that. But what does know your soil mean? Traditionally, most people have probably seen that pie chart on your right-hand side as how we represent soils. And it's, the mineral fraction, the air, the water, and the organic matter fraction. And I think we've heard today that it's probably more complicated than that. It's really three components, soil. And I see it as being a three-legged chair. And on a three-legged chair, obviously you need all three legs to be a stable chair to sit on. So the first component is about the soil physical properties. And when I talk about soil physical properties, it's about the texture, it's about the structure, it's about the porosity, it's about the way the air and the water exchange in the soil profile, and it's about the surface condition. The second component is the chemical properties, and to me that's about fertility, acidicity, salinity, and how each of those interact. And Daniel, you heard talk about the balancing act and the galaxy analogy. And lastly, the soil biology, and possibly the most important of the legs, because it kind of brings all those two together. It's directly entwined into how soil physically and chemically behaves. I suspect, is this the same presentation? Where's Gilly? Yeah, I think this might have been an old presentation. That's all right. We'll adapt. So what does your soil mean? I've spoken about the parts. So it's also about how it behaves. And I've heard multiple people today talk about observing and watching, and not just temporally, but spatially. How does your soil behave over a certain part of the block? And how does that change from when you're on it 10 years ago to now? And how has it behaved after flood, after drought? So a really important thing to do. And what that allows you to do is to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of the soil. And from that knowledge, you can then understand the resilience of the soil. And with that knowledge, it allows you to respond. And how you respond might be that land use, or a land use you're choosing to use, is just not appropriate, or it is appropriate. Or it might be that you, it's about how you manage that soil. So yes, it is an appropriate use, and this is how I need to manage it, given the resilience of that soil. And out of all of that, the main reason we are doing all this is for some sort of value. Now, that value could be productivity and economic return, but it's also ecosystem services. That, the value the soil provides on top of the economics and the production system. And I know Gwen's mentioned a heap of ecosystem services in his presentation about the value of soils. So I don't need to go into that. So that was my broad overview about the value and why it is a valuable thing to invest in terms of your knowledge. I'm going to move to Mackay District and a big picture thing, a big picture perspective, because Mackay District is very complex. And on the, okay, so on the left-hand side, the image, that's a geology, a reconnaissance level geology picture of the Mackay District. And as you can see, every colour is a different geological unit. And within those geological units, there's different parent material and different lithologies. And what we do know that with different geologies, you get, and with complex geologies, you get complex landscapes, and then you get complex soils. And it's that complexity that landholders, land managers have to manage. And it's a challenge. And we saw some examples of Marcus up in the wet tropics where those features in the paddock, those paleo channels, they're something that a landholder would need to manage for. So to address that complexity, what has occurred over the last 50 odd years is a series of soil maps or soil mapping projects. And I've just shown the coastal ones at the moment. They're scattered all the way up the coast of Queensland, primarily in the more intensively used landscapes. Out to the west in the grazing systems, the scale of data becomes more broad or broader scale. Now if I bring your attention to, so I need to get the right one here, a zoom in of the Mackay District. So I've just picked one of those areas, the green one here. So this was a soil survey done 40 odd years ago, and you don't actually need to be able to read anything on that map, but I suppose what you're looking at are the different colours, because that's pulling out the complexity of the landscapes and the soils in the district. So in this instance, the greens and the browns are alluvial soils or alluvial landscapes. And if I was to pick another colour, the yellows are volcanics, igneous lithologies. And with each of those colours, there's even more division. And you can't see that, but there is division which then separates soil types. Now, in terms of your knowledge, understanding, and the journey that you're on with understanding and soils, this is probably a good place to start if you haven't already started here. And many of you probably already have. It's broad, it's district level mapping, but it gives you an indication, a starting point of the soil type that you might have over a lot on plan, and that's over your property. And that's where I'm going to move to now. So it's about accessing that data. So there's multiple ways you can access it. You can access the files through the internet as large mapping sheets or reports. But can I suggest probably the best way to access it is on Queensland Globe. So everyone here aware or know of Queensland Globe? So it's a interactive mapping tool, has huge amounts of information on it. Everything from imagery over various years. So you can actually look at your property and look at the imagery probably over the last 50, 60 years. And you can see how your block has changed. Of course, as technology has improved, the imagery is better now than it was 30 years ago. But there's soil mapping, there's geology mapping, there's bore data, there's rivers, there's streams, there's DEM contours, there's grazing land types, there's tenure, there's cadastre. There's a lot of information on there, and there are some online tutorials that you can use to access or to help you build your confidence up in accessing that. And I will also put a piece of paper over on the bar over there for anyone who's interested in just an online tutorial about accessing and using Queensland Globe. Probably won't be till next year, but if you want to put your name down on that list, I'll organise a time, and if you're available, you can chime in and we can spend an hour looking at Queensland Globe and how to access it. So I'm now just going to look at one feature of Queensland Globe, and I'm going to focus on the soil feature, of course. And this is an example of an area of land in the Mackay District where I have zoomed in, I've turned on the soil layers, and what you can see there is imagery. You can see some black lines and you can see some yellow dots. So the black lines are polygons representing soil types that were mapped at the district level. The yellow dots are soil sites that were described to help do that mapping, help produce that mapping. So if I was to click on a polygon, a yellow dot, an option would come up where I can then delve deeper into what that yellow dot means. And I'll show you an output of that very shortly. Similarly, if I was to click on a polygon, it would give a description of what that polygon has been mapped at. And as you can see, if I was to click on one of those, it doesn't matter which one at this point, that concept there that I can barely read, in fact I can't read, a neutral, bleached, mottled, brown, duplex soil developed on Quaternary alluvium. So it's a bit of jargon in there, but it's a starting point. And if you were to go to the report that was developed with that mapping, it would have a half-page description on that soil type, and it would even go into more detail about land management and potential limitations or constraints of that soil. But firstly, of course, you'd need to confirm that was the soil over your block. I said before, if you click the yellow dot, you would get some information. That's an example of the type of information you might get. Not all sites have this much information, but there's a description, and again, the words don't matter for the purposes of this, but there's a description of the site, description of the profile. You may or may not have a picture of the profile, you may or may not have a picture of the landscape, and then some field information. So quite a useful place to go for a quick look at what might be available to you. So again, part of your journey of understanding soils, particularly soils on your property. So I've started big, I've started at the district level, and now I think what everyone needs to do is you need to get to the level that suits you, that you need for your paddock, for your property. And, so we've got the broad scale map in here, we've got the paddock level we need to get to. And why do we need to do that? Well, just to repeat, I won't spend too much time on it. It's because with that knowledge, you can respond to your soil types, to your landscape. You can then help maximise the value being whatever is important to you, I suspect, as the landowner, land manager. So I've mentioned the soil mapping at the district level, but there are heaps of other avenues to access information and knowledge. And in this district has a lot of options and choices for you to access that information. I've just put logos up of those companies or organisations that you can access. And I suppose it's about taking advantage of that, like probably you have today. But there are other tools you can use, other technology that you can use that may or may not suit everyone. But again, it's an avenue that you could pursue. So imagery and drones is one, and we've heard Marcus talk about that today and how Daniel and Marcus used it in the trial. So the image, let me just start with the imagery first. So the imagery tells us a lot. So even without any fancy processing of data or imagery, you can see a lot from a photo or from an imagery, and you can see those features that this is actually one of this would look very familiar because I've just stolen one of Marcus's slides. Thanks, Marcus. You can see those features, and straight away that makes you ask questions about why is there a difference. Okay, and there's the overlay of the drone outputs. So with the imagery, with the outputs of the drone, yet even more information to help you build a story about what is going on. So that assesses properties or attributes above the ground, and yes, there could be a direct link about what you see above the ground to what's happening below the ground, and I think Marcus mentioned some of those other things, those other externalities that could be driving crop vigour. It may not be soils, it could be pests, it could be hydrology, it could be you just had a cyclone through, there could be a whole range of things. Another tool that is accessible to some, and in this part of the world I believe there's been a fair bit of this done already, is using EMI. So that's sensing soil conductance using that equipment, and it measures, as I said, soil conductance, which is pretty much driven by soil moisture, clay content, probably the two major attributes of soil that soil conductance is measured by. And again, you get this output, as you can see on the right-hand side. Now, that's a pretty picture, and as a landholder, you might know why that's blue and why that's orange. But it's, I suppose, your job as a land manager, the landowner, to try and understand what that picture is saying and see if you can actually relate it back to something real, something tangible, something that relates to the soil, and then something that you can or may be able to do something about. And of course, the final output of those tools, oh sorry, that's just an image at different depths, is the development of a finer scaled soil map. So we started with the district level soil map, and with further information, you can actually refine that soil map, which then allows you to produce those layers that could feed into precision ag systems. Now, probably the other massive input in terms of understanding soils is the landholder's own knowledge, and we've already touched on that. That temporal spatial understanding, how soil behaves after floods, after droughts, after it's been cultivated, after it's been left fallow, after a property's been spelled from grazing. So there's that is a massive and powerful resource that needs to be factored into understanding soils and again on your soil knowledge journey. So I now want to move to the next level down. So we're moving down and starting at the broader district level down to stuff that you can actually do on farm now or on property. And really what it comes down to is asking yourself the question, what do the patterns mean? And we've heard that already probably 3 times today. What have you observed? Example, that the crop vigor, how well is the crop growing? Is it related to the soil, or is it to some other factor, whether it be pest or disease? How do the soils vary, both chemically, physically, and biologically? And that is something that needs to happen with soil exposure. So you have to dig a hole, or auger a hole, or core a hole, or create a vertical exposure. But one thing that is fairly certain that we know is that the differences are generally around how a soil behaves and how a crop or a plant behaves that is growing in that soil. It's all to do with these 4 factors. It's either drainage, water holding capacity, the nutrients, and soil health. And in relation to those 4 things, it's either that there's too much or too little. And I think it's on property or on your farm and as a land manager, it's about understanding, well, what is your scenario? Are you too much or too little? And the only way to answer a lot of these questions is dig, auger, excavate, and obviously sending some soil samples away to the lab and to specific labs. So poorly drained soils. Remember too much, too little. So if we look at the poorer side of a soil in a landscape, so these are often low points in the landscape. They're seasonally wet. To see them or view them in the field, this is what they look like. They're often grey, so pale colours, and mottled. So this is that sporadic colour that you see within the profile, particularly in the subsoil. You may not see it necessarily in the surface because of the organic matter, but primarily in the subsoil you'll see this mottling and these pale colours. So when you see that, when you're digging across your block, it will prompt you to think, well, how well drained is this site? Is it something that could be poorly drained, imperfectly drained, moderately well drained, rapidly drained? And there's that spectrum of drainage that fits all the way from poorly to rapidly. And that might help you answer questions why something is behaving, or why a crop is growing or not growing, or why you're struggling to get yields that you're hoping to get. And on the other side is the well-drained soils. And these are the bright colours, the reds, the browns, and often whole-coloured. So, as you can see, you're missing that mottling colour that you see there. Now, there is a fact sheet that may or may not be part of your packages, I'm not sure, that to do with understanding soil colour. But I suspect even that Tropical Soils Guide, I suspect probably goes into detail about this. So another useful resource. Available water, that's that second thing that is, or attribute that too much, too little. And that's essentially is the amount of water available to the plant. And it's driven by clay content, soil structure, soil depth, and those physical and chemical barriers those physical ones being compaction, pans or rock, and those chemical ones being acidity, salinity, and soil nutrition. So, understanding how much soil moisture, how big is or how deep is your bucket is a really important question for you to answer. And, this is one that does require a fair bit of investigation because it is driven by lots of things, not just what you can see. There could be a chemical constraint that is there. So it's this same old message of you really need to dig, look, feel, and do some testing. And there is a fact sheet on that too, perhaps in your package. Third one is soil nutrients, and we've already touched on that. I think Daniel did, about whether there's a deficiency or toxicity, and driven by clay content, soil permeability, drainage, climate, soil pH, and there's various things you can do to identify any nutrient toxicity deficiency. The plant can tell you a story, but so does the soil. And then there's a question about what you can change. Is it something you can change, and how easily is it changed? And that becomes an economics question. But what should be in everyone's tool bag is a soil pH kit. I think they're $20 from Bunnings. They give you a pH within a 1/2 to 1 unit accuracy. Really easy to do. And it's critical that that's not just done at the surface. It needs to be done in the subsoil as well. And lastly, soil biology. This is again part of that three-legged chair of maintaining the soil health. It's the thing that is king in all of this, and is because it's for lots of reasons. It can adjust the chemistry of the soil. It can adjust the fertility. It can adjust the soil physical properties, and it's something that includes everything from the microscopic level to the macro level, and again, there's things that you can visually do in the field, or you need to send away for analysis to understand how your biology is going in your soil. So my last slide, coming up to lunch. So where to from here? Again, there was that quote that I just thought was pretty good. But how well do you know your soils? It's a good question. I'm guessing everyone's probably going to be asking that question of themselves. And is there more you can do to understand them better? What resources or tools are available to you, and who can assist you on that journey? Have you got an industry group? Have you got someone you can tap into, an agronomist, to help you on that knowledge journey? And yeah, that's it. But also wanted to do a plug for World Soils Day on the 5th of December. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yep. Hello. Hello. Oh, hi. Can I get this one working too, please? I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions for Mark before he heads off. They're all shy.
What's the modelly colours in the subsoil on your slide there? Is that iron or aluminium or...?
Yeah, effectively mottling indicates fluctuating drainage levels. So iron is a fairly mobile iron element in the soil. When there's good aeration, it rusts just like metal does. So you get those nice whole-coloured red soils. So if we look at the extremes of soil, red soils being the most well-drained versus the grey soils that are the most poorly drained. So when you get mottling, you know that there is some preferential wetting and drying occurring in the profile. So it's just indicates that there's some, once you start seeing it, there's something could be going on in relation to drainage. But it's all to do with iron, whether it's oxidised or reduced.
Anyone else? I think they're all hungry.
Yeah, I did try to talk quickly.
You did awesomely. Thanks so much, Mark. Really, really appreciate it. Round of applause. Thanks, everyone. So I'm not going to hound you too much. I know you can probably smell some of the lunch that's come out and you're getting a bit hungry. So please enjoy and also use this time to network again. If there was someone you really wanted to talk to, or you want to pick Daniel or Gwyn's brain.